Hi, everybody. I am delighted to have this week Kyle Bueller, who is the co-founder of Psychedelics Today, which we're going to hear a lot about. Kyle and I have a bit of a background. So he is a graduate of the integral psychology program at Burlington College, which I would later chair after he left. So we had a little backstory. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
So Kyle, why don't you just start out and just give them a little who's Kyle Bueller kind of thing.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Piers. Always excited to catch up with you. Yeah, my background, I'll do a short background, then maybe we can get into a little bit of the story. Yeah, as Piers said, I did my BA in, I always call it transpersonal psychology, but I guess the degree does say integral psychology on that. I always tried to get Kim to change it to transpersonal.
I actually did change it after you left.
Nice. I was more of a Graphian than a Wilbur person. So did a lot of studying there with like shamanism, dream work, studied with some teachers, Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson, in holotropic breathwork and transpersonal breathwork, and really kind of focused a lot of my time studying psychedelics and psychedelic psychotherapy, just the history of it, the therapeutic use of psychedelics. And I kind of found myself wanting to get involved in this area of research through personal experience, and as well as a near-death experience that I had when I was 16, and we can dig a little bit into that as well. And then just recently wrapped up my master's in counseling somatic psychology at Prescott College. And yeah, co-founder of Psychedelics Today. We're an online education company. We provide a bi-weekly podcast exploring kind of the science and culture around the emerging psychedelic field, and also host a lot of online courses, training clinicians, therapists, coaches, folks that want to get a little bit more involved in the field and just kind of get a nice foundation on what they need to know as this field starts to emerge. So yeah, and I've been studying breathwork for about 10 years. That's probably been one of my main focuses and main modalities in my life.
Excellent. So the Kyle who has the near-death experience at age 16, was he invested in any of these kinds of topics at that time?
Yeah, so sometimes I always leave this part out of the story, but when I was 15, we had a book assignment for high school, and I read this book called Snowboarding to Nirvana during my freshman year. It was during winter break, and it was about this person that went over to Nepal, ran into a monk, taught him transcendental meditation, and was really he was using this meditation technique to get into flow states while he was snowboarding. And I obviously fell in love with that because I was just starting to really get into snowboarding. I grew up skateboarding most of my life, so it was an easy transition. And there are some meditation techniques in there. And so that really kind of opened me up to the world of meditation. And I practiced the techniques, really thinking about how could I possibly improve my skateboarding and snowboarding? How can I kind of empty my mind? So I started to get into it a little bit. And, I remember having some interesting experiences with those meditation techniques. And then, so the year later, I always kind of make the joke that I snowboarded to Nirvana in some sense, because it was around the same time, a year later during Christmas break. I had this really traumatic snowboarding accident on New Year's Eve, my sophomore year of high school.
And that was an NDE.
Yeah. So try to do the long condensed version. I could get into a lot of detail with it, but yeah, I went snowboarding with my brother and his friend ended up kind of taking a spill, hit his head, and we just got to the mountain. This was in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, so we were doing night skiing, and we took a rest and I said, hey, we just got here, we've only been on the mountain for like an hour or so. I want to at least take one more run before we head out of here. And so he was up for it. And so I planned the longest route that I could possibly take and say, we're just going to take one more run. And, you know, if you ski or snowboard, you probably know that that's bad juju, and you should never really say that. I didn't know that at the time. So I was going around this turn that was kind of like a snake. And so I'm going around this like really sharp turn on my toe edge. It's nighttime. I think it's around like 6 o'clock or so. And the way that the lighting was and how fast I was going and coming at it, there was a mountain of snow in this blind spot. And I saw it and said, oh shit, if I hit this, I'm going to die. So I need to either slow down or move. And as I tried to slow down, as I tried to move, everything just kind of went slow motion. It was as if this thing was kind of sucking me in. And I hit this mound of snow, and then time sped up, flew through the air. My brother said probably about like 30 feet. I don't know if I was that high off the air, but I went far. And the nose of my snowboard hit, my shoulder hit, and I heard a loud pop. And I immediately thought, like, you know, I snapped a rib. I couldn't breathe. I was laying face down in the snow, screaming, gasping for air. I probably slid probably another like 10 or 15 feet after that. And I remember just sitting there face down, just grunting. And I knew something was wrong. There was a lot of pain. And so my brother and his friends stopped and said, you know, we'll go down and get somebody. And they left me there by myself. And, you know, I watched all these people just whiz by me, parents and kids, and I'm sitting there going, ugh, ugh! And nobody stopped besides these two punk ass snowboarders, like wanting to smoke cigarettes. They asked if I had a lighter and asked if I was okay. So, like, you know, the typical people you judge and say, oh, they're bad people. They're the ones that throw snowballs at you in the terrain park and say really mean things to you. But, you know, thankfully they stopped. They put their snowboards in front of me so nobody would just come around that turn and run into me. So I was really thankful that they stopped. So I was on the mountain for about maybe like 30, 40 minutes, and my brother came back and said, nobody's coming for you. And I said, well, what do you mean nobody's coming for me? He's like, I don't know. We went down, told the lifty, and he just kind of was like, yeah, whatever. So those guys were really pissed, and they're like, oh no, we'll get somebody up here ASAP. So they grabbed their stuff and they went down. Luckily, you know, it's a smaller mountain, so there is patrol probably like every hour or so on the trails. And luckily somebody found me. They got a toboggan, they brought me down. And by the time I got to the first aid, they were checking everything out. They said, you know, you don't have any bruising, nothing looks swollen around your chest, but you have really low vitals. So we think you have internal injuries. And at that moment, I just said, oh shit, I'm gonna die tonight. Like, I just knew something was really wrong. And, you know, didn't really grow up too religious, but I started praying to God, saying like, you know, God, if you're out there, I know I don't talk to you much, but I don't want to die tonight. Thankfully, they called a helicopter to get me medevaced out. And I just actually found this out a few years ago. Talking to my dad, I guess once they left and they put me in the ambulance to get to the helipad, I guess one of them said, they looked at my dad and said, your son's in his golden hours. He may not make it. And so luckily they medevaced me out and got me to the hospital. And so by the time I got to the hospital, death started to really kind of not be in my mind as much. I started to feel a little bit more euphoric, started to kind of be a little bit more outside my body. And my uncle was there. He was a first responder for the township and county. So my dad immediately called him, said, hey, Kyle's going to be at St. Luke's over in Bethlehem. Can you meet him over there? So, you know, I had family member right there in the emergency room with me. And I remember he was standing by me saying, like, I know these people, they're going to be okay. And I had this really weird thought kind of coming in my head saying, like, you know, this is somebody that's blood related to you and you consider family. And family feels like what roots us here on earth. But where you're about to go, you can't take anybody with you. This is your own individual journey.
You had that
And
thought.
yeah, I remember just looking at him and saying, you know, I can't take him where I'm about to go. This is me and myself only. Everybody I know, I can't take anybody with me on this journey that I'm about to go on. And as this was happening, you know, in the meantime, they're trying to take my clothes off. They're trying to take my snowboard boots off, and they're having trouble. And I'm just being like, trying to be super compliant with them. I'm like, oh, I can help you, and you know, I'll try to help you wherever I can. And you know, I could just hear them say like, I can't get a pulse on them. They kept jabbing me with IVs to try to hook an IV up in my upper arms and stuff like that. And I could hear one nurse say like, I can't like get his IV. His veins in his upper body are collapsing. I can't get a pulse on him. And you know, I'm hearing all this stuff, and I'm really starting to feel the anxiety all around me. Of the nurses, and it felt like I was started to be outside of my body at that point. And the way I describe it was like I tapped into some sort of like oceanic feeling, and I could feel all the emotion in the room. It was like I was tapping into some sort of, I don't know, field of consciousness or something. And they needed to do a sonogram to figure out what was going on. And so they did a sonogram on me and said, you have massive internal bleeding. This is why you feel really sick. You have blood all in your abdomen. We need to figure out where this is coming from immediately. And so luckily they got me to a CAT scan machine. And at that point, you know, I remember just laying in the CAT scan machine, slowly starting to drift off. I was so sleepy. I felt like I was submerged in a tub of ice water because I had no blood circulating through my system. And I started to feel like I was on the other side of the room with the doctors, and all I could hear them say, "Don't fall asleep, Kyle." I remember them being on like the intercom. It's like, "Don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep." And something inside of me was just like, this is the only thing I can do. And that's when it really kind of started to take off. You know, the noise of the CAT scan machines going on, and they're telling me to breathe. And every time I take a breath, it's just so painful. And all of a sudden, the way I described it was like there was an orb of light. And it was like an inner voice. It wasn't so much of an external voice, like I could hear it. It was more kind of like this internal voice that came from, I don't know where it came from, this kind of orb of light, whatever it was. And it said, "You're going home. You're going back to the stars where we all come from. This physical life's going to cease to exist, but you're going to transition on, and this is just a transition. The more you struggle with this, the harder it's going to be. So the more that you can relax into this experience, the easier it's going to be for you." And so at that point, I said, "Oh, I'm going home. Well, this is exciting. This is what we all been waiting for." And all of a sudden, I was just filled with a lot of bliss and love and excitement, thinking, "Wow, this is what we wait for our entire life, and I'm ready for it." And so it's a really interesting thing when I think about, you know, when we talk about like outer body experiences. There was part of me that felt like I was out on the other room with the doctors while they were like, you know, performing the CAT scan computers and stuff like that. And then there was another part. The more I went inward, it was like the farther I went outward. So just kind of thinking about like, you know, typical outer body experiences, like you're detaching and then you're kind of leaving. This was the farther I went inward, it was like a preparation to catapult me wherever I was about to go. So I started to really go inside and really trying to relax into, I guess, this death process. And yeah, it was just this voice that was really comforting, saying like, you know, the more that you struggle with this, the harder it's going to be. So, you know, you're going home. And I really believed that, and I really trusted that. And so they got me out of the CAT scan, and they said, you know, you ruptured your spleen, you have massive internal bleeding. We need to do surgery ASAP. And they were explaining, giving me anesthesia. And I remember the last thing I heard was, you know, should we use an electric razor or a straight razor? And then I just passed out. I don't remember them giving me the anesthesia. So I'm not too sure if that played a role in it, but Yeah, that was the last thing I heard before kind of waking up in the ICU.
Wow. So they removed your spleen. Were there other really invasive procedures or
No,
injury?
yeah, they just removed my spleen. So what they ended up telling me what happened was my spleen rupture. The doctor said it was probably the worst one he's ever seen. It wasn't just like a little rupture, it just exploded. And I lost about 5 to 5.5 pints of blood internally. So they were even surprised I was alive. I think some of the doctors were saying sometimes people can start dying around 4 pints of blood getting lost, really depending on how much blood you have in your system. Which I guess you have anywhere from 8 to 12 pints. And so, yeah, I lost more than half my blood internally since it wasn't circulating. And they said if I came in 5 or 10 minutes later, they probably would have pronounced me dead on arrival. I wouldn't have made it. So they really caught me at like the tail end there.
Coming to consciousness, was there anything like how to say this? Was your coming to consciousness informed by what had happened before you went under the anesthetic? I mean, was that experience right there still, or did you have to kind of come out of a fog, or
Um,
were you shocked to be in the hospital bed?
Well, so they started wheeling me back to the ICU, and I remember as they were wheeling me through the hallways, I took the biggest breath as possible. It felt like my soul entered back into my body. I remember like just shooting up out of this hospital stretcher bed as they're rolling me, and I was like, and it was like something shot back into me,
That's
and I could.
post-op.
What was that?
That's post-op.
Post-op, yeah. Yep.
Wow.
So it was right after the surgery, and they were wheeling me back to ICU, and that happened, and I just shot up from the bed and started shaking, and in that split second, I could hear he's awake and he's cold, and then I passed out, and then I woke up in ICU, and I woke up to my family surrounding me, and I knew what day it was. So I remember waking up and saying, "Is it New Year's Eve?" And they're like, "Yeah, Kyle, it's only." Yep. And I said, "Did the ball drop?" And they said, "No, it's only 9 o'clock." And I was still kind of aware of time. I was like, shit, it was only 9 o'clock. This probably all happened around 7. It's like, whoa. And then I just remember being really thirsty because of anesthesia and stuff like that. And they told me I couldn't have anything to drink. So I just passed out. That was too much to bear.
So did you have a long convalescence?
A long time in the hospital there.
Well, and even after getting back to yourself.
It took a very, very long time. I think as the anesthesia was leaving my body and some of the pain medication starting to like leave my system, I was definitely like in a fog. It was like I woke up and there was like a map of the world on my chest, kind of metaphorically speaking, this new way of seeing, these new belief systems. And as I started to really get out of the hospital, I was really confused about what happened to me. I would sit there and go like, where did I go? Who did I talk to? Something has fundamentally changed within me. So that Kyle that was like beforehand died, and now I feel like I'm somebody completely new with a totally new way of viewing the life. And so I was also 16, so trying to like get back to like social relationships and school was really difficult for me. I just kind of felt like I saw the way the machine worked, and I remember just going back to school and not doing any work, really not engaging in anything. And the teachers were really upset because they could see that I was a really bright student, but I just couldn't buy into what they were trying to teach me anymore. It was like I saw something way beyond, I guess, like typical societal structures and norms at that point that it was really hard to come back to. I just remember telling the teachers like, this is all just factory producing kids. This is nonsense. Like there's other ways to learn. I could be spending my time doing other things and just sitting here.
So were you aware of having a totally new relationship to death?
Yeah.
And did you have anyone to talk to about this in a meaningful way?
Not really. No. I was pretty much alone with it. I mean, I would talk to my friends about it, and try to talk to some people about it, but you know, it was like we're all 16, 17, like, you know, I was 16, I was the oldest, so around 16, 15, you know, I'm sitting there thinking like I just talked to God. My soul left my body, like, and then everybody else probably is worried about like, oh, so and so hates me, or like I like this girl, or I'm trying to get high tonight, or you know, just like normal things. And I'm sitting there going like, what are we all doing here? This is a really weird place to be.
So, did you go through any kind of changes in your sort of the emotional tenor of your life? Did you find that you were kinder, or were you more impatient, or
I
did you feel
started,
things more
I,
intensely?
yeah, I definitely felt things more intensely. I felt like I was more aware of kind of all the bullshit in the world. And you know, I feel like some of my patience was really being tested at times. And so I was definitely on a high for like a good few months of holy shit, I'm alive. I'm so thankful to be alive. And then, you know, reality started to set in, and then all of a sudden I felt like I was in hell. I could just see all the human suffering in the world. It was just too much to bear, and I would just question like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? If we know that it causes suffering, why do we continue to engage in systems that perpetuate suffering and violence? Why do we just believe in the things that people tell us to believe in? Why isn't anybody questioning the way that the system works? And so at that point, I started to really experience a very heavy existential crisis, and life started to become meaningless at that point. And by the time I got to my junior year, we were studying existential writers, so like Camus and a few others. And you know, I recently, well, within the past few years, I went and dug up some old papers, and I was severely depressed. I was reading some of these papers, but it was so helpful to just see how other people were processing these existential beliefs. And I was like, so I really, really resonated with it. And I think like my junior English teacher really appreciated the depth that I was going into in these existential thoughts. I remember her really commenting on a lot of stuff, like, because I was in it. I was really deep into like, none of this shit matters. I don't understand why we're doing anything.
Hmm. I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel that way today. A lot of
Yeah.
people in the audience, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So when did you start realizing that there was some way that you could work with this material, you know, intellectually, or that there was a body of thought around it already, and all that?
It took me a few years. So, you know, that happened when I was like 19. The existential writers were really helpful for a little bit. But I had lots of ups and downs. I really had a lot of suicidal ideation and thoughts. Really wanting to leave this world. It was really painful to be here. And I really thought that my home and like where I was supposed to be was in this place that I called the stars. And so there was a lot of sometimes anger there of like a Western, you know, medical practices of saying like, why did the doctors save me? I accepted my fate, and that was it. Like I should have left at that point. And so it took me a really long time to actually like process what happened, and to start to then appreciate and be really grateful for a lot of that. But there were a lot of dark feelings there. But it wasn't until a couple of years later, I think I was around 19 or so, I stumbled across some psilocybin mushrooms, And that really helped me process a lot of stuff on a totally different level that, like, you know, nothing was really touching. You know, I wasn't going to therapy. I wasn't really kind of like looking for help, I guess, because, you know, maybe I didn't really know how to convey it to people around me that I needed this type of help. I remember, you know, when I started getting in trouble in school, they would just kind of like really not understand it. So for example, actually last Thanksgiving, I think it was, my mom showed me this email that one of my teachers sent her. And I want to go back and take a picture of it because it was pretty weird and messed up. But she emailed my mom and said, do you know, like, Kyle's new philosophy on life? Like, you know, nothing matters. And, you know, just, do you understand like how this near-death experience has affected him? He's not doing any of his work. He's not doing any of his homework. He's smart, but I really think that you need to give him a new near-death experience and have a new confrontation with death, because, like, you know, he needs to get his shit together. Pretty much is what she was saying. And was like, this accident like is just like kind of derailing him from his academic success. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't think you really know what you're talking about. But, you know, here's somebody that was, you know, a teacher I was trying to explain my experience to, and then she took it as like, you know, emailing my mom telling me she needs to give me a new near-death experience to appreciate life a little bit more.
Well, it sounds like you might have pissed her off.
I think I pissed off a few of the teachers. And then, you know, I remember getting in trouble one time and going to the principal and just trying to explain this stuff to the principal. And she's like, you should just be thankful that you're alive. And I was just like, I don't think you understand the psycho-spiritual crisis that I'm going through. Like, you just tell me I'm thankful to be alive. Like, that, I'm sitting here saying I don't want to be here at all, you know, and like just telling me I should be thankful for that. I mean, yeah, I am definitely. But, you know, during that time is like, you know, I think I was trying to reach out in certain ways, and maybe people didn't really know how to contain that, or maybe know how to point me in the right direction. And I think that's a cultural thing. We don't know how to confront death, right? And so when people start really exploring this, they go, oh shit, like I don't really know how to contain this. I don't know what to tell this person.
I haven't done my work.
Yeah.
So what was so confirming about the first psilocybin experience?
So I think I only had one experience before that. It was with a smaller dose. And so with that dose, it was, you know, I got a little bit of euphoria, but this was like the first time I ever had like a full-blown psychedelic experience. And I went into it not in the best mindset. You know, I went into it wanting to escape, feeling very depressed. And, you know, I was out in the woods with a friend of mine, and I was just like, yeah, whatever, fuck it. I'll just eat these things and just, maybe I'll just forget about some stuff for a bit. But as the medicine really started to take effect, I really started to lose grip with my reality. I was watching my body dissolve, and I watched my friend puke up his mushrooms, and I immediately think like, maybe we're dying, you know, like that's not a good sign to watch somebody puke up their mushrooms. And I remember we were walking through this really narrow trail, and this sense of fear just started to engulf me. And I told my friends, like, I really need to sit down, and I'm going to sit on this rock because this is where I'm going to die. And so I sat on this tiny little rock in this trail, and all of a sudden, I mean, this is, you know, the typical bad trip. All of a sudden the leaves and plants started to have teeth, and everything became animated, and I just started kind of losing it and said, holy shit, like I think we're overdosing. I'm terrified. And, you know, not knowing that psilocybin is probably one of the safest recreational or, you know, plant medicines there is. They're really hard to overdose on them. You probably have to eat like 50 pounds or so, which I don't think you ever want to do. But this inner experience started to really take on, and all of a sudden it felt very familiar. And I was like, this is death. death is on my shoulder right now. And so I started to close my eyes and go into it, because the external world was just so scary and so intense. And as I started to go inward, which really reminded me of the near-death experience, the more internal I was going, the farther out I was going. And so as I started to tune inward, I started to enter a void of nothingness. I didn't know my name. I didn't know where I worked. I didn't know who I was, where I lived, where I was, like geographically at the moment. And I was trying to grasp on to every little thing that would remind me of who's Kyle, like who am I? All that started to disappear. And I started to then travel, I guess, through the cosmos, and I started seeing all these star systems, and then I hit the edge of the universe, is what it felt like. And then all of a sudden I started to peer back and I saw myself. And then all of a sudden these entities started to appear. And they were in the cockpit of my brain. And at that point I was like, I started losing it, thinking, the fuck is going on here? And I'm totally not aware of my body. Like I completely blacked out in a sense. And it felt like it was eternity. Like I was just going on this celestial travel of some sort. And so when I started to see these entities emerge, I said, this feels really familiar. And so I started to become a little bit more comfortable with the idea. And I said, wow, it's like, I feel like I've been here before. And I was like, this really reminds me of death. And so I was thinking, I was like, maybe I'm in a death bardo, because this reminds me a lot of my near-death experience right now. And so I asked these things. I said, hey, like, is this where I went when I died that one night, or almost died? Is this where my soul went? Like, I feel like I went somewhere. And they just looked at me and they said, yeah, more or less so. And I said, okay. And I was like, well, have I been here before? And they're like, thousands of times. And I was like, oh shit, okay. If I've been here thousands of times, if this is some sort of death bardo, then maybe, this is God. This is what I talk to. And so, are you God? Are you the entities or things that gave me all that information? And they're like, yeah, more or less so. And so it's this total trickster archetype of like, we're not going to give you really any real information. We're just going to kind of toss things in front of you and entertain you in that sense. But as I started to come back from that experience, I remember I just heard my friend say, hey man, just breathe. And then like I shot back to my body and started to breathe and said, I don't think I was breathing the whole time. And I don't know how long I was out. In those states, seconds feel like eternity. So it could have only been like a minute that I was really kind of going through this time traveling type of experience. But, I've sat with this experience for a while, and it felt like a total death and rebirth. And when we look at shamanic traditions, this felt like a very shamanic initiatory crisis, being devoured by the external world, being devoured by spirits, being torn to shreds in a sense, and then being put back together. It took me a while to look at some of these anthropological stories of, okay, these are archetypal narratives that have happened in shamanic cultures and different places. So, could this have been an initiatory crisis of mine that I was going through? And then also kind of coming from the psychological standpoint, was I able to re-experience and recontextualize that trauma that I was going through? So like when I tell this story of entities, people might be like, yo, what the hell is that about? People ask, do you believe in that? Do you think it was real? There's parts that experience felt more real than real, like whatever this is. But there's another part of me that thinks like, maybe this is a way that my mind or my psyche was trying to heal from that big trauma. Mm-hmm. And to be able to create these archetypal images can really help the psyche grab hold of something. Because that's the one thing that I really struggled with after that near-death experience was I didn't have this traditional near-death experience where I was going down a tunnel of light. I was able to see something. And really, like, you know, when you hear some of those stories, it was like, oh, I met my ancestors or met family members and they told me it wasn't my time. Like, I just remember feeling like I was going home, something telling me I was going back to the stars. And then all of a sudden I woke up in the ICU, and being really confused about, like, I know I went somewhere and there's something that was so deep in my bones that I couldn't shake it. It was a felt experience. It wasn't a visual experience. It wasn't like this thing that I could
Right.
see and make sense of, which, living in our paradigm, we need to see things to make sense of it. But there was a felt sense of experience that I knew that I went somewhere, and that was truth to me. And so to be able to, like, re-experience that, and I guess be able to see that, interact with whatever this thing was, whether that was my own psyche, whether this was some sort of ancestor entity, archetypal force, that really helped me kind of start to put the pieces back together, and felt like it gave me some sort of resolution around that trauma. I was able to, like, I guess, recontextualize that and put it back together and go, wow, I feel so much better about that experience. I'm not sitting there wondering as much.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite stunning on multiple levels. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you and going, okay, so as you said, we don't have a cosmology that we all share where we understand death. So you're a 15-year-old kid who really lacks any kind of tools for integration.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you know, I wanted to say it earlier, it's kind of amazing that the wonderful world of mental health didn't just have its way with you for 20 years. But then, like you said, the psyche knows what you need, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like, was it waiting for the, you know, the opportunity or something?
Yeah, and, you know, every time, I mean, you bring up a good point, and, you know, I talk about this story pretty often when I talk about, you know, work with spiritual emergence, and just thinking about, you know, some of the people I worked with in the past with early episode psychosis and mental health. You know, when I would start talking to some doctors and stuff about what was going on, there was always, it was always, we want to just prescribe you an SSRI, we need to give you medication. And there was something deeply intuitive in me that said, don't tell them everything. They're not going to understand. Find somebody that has been through this experience, and they're going to understand you a lot better than this person.
Did that extend?
What was that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, there's nobody that understands death unless you've been there.
Right. So you muzzling yourself to the mental health professionals, I mean, that sounds like some sort of deep psychic knowing.
Yeah.
Did you also do that with your parents?
You know, I never really had a lot of these conversations with them. Partly because, I mean, I grew up in a very kind of chaotic family system, so I think that also played a role into me not really wanting to come back here, coming back to a lot of dysfunction and whatnot. But I had a really hard time kind of opening up about some of that spiritual stuff to them. I didn't really know how to talk about that stuff. So I never really brought it up to them, and they never really asked. So I kind of kept it quiet.
You didn't grow up in any kind of spiritual environment?
No, not really. I think I stopped going to church when I was around like 5, maybe.
So did the experience with the psilocybin give birth to a real enthusiasm around psychedelics? Or did you find yourself searching? I'm kind of curious about when the sort of more intellectual, theoretical quest started.
Yeah, so when I came back from that experience, my friend said, just breathe, man, just play. And I looked at him and I took a big breath and I was like, just play. And so I started kind of like moving things with my mind. And then I looked at him and said, I just met aliens. And he just cracked up and started laughing. Or I think I said, I met elves. And And at that point, I didn't know anything about Terence McKenna. I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. And so I remember I was in a bookstore one day and I came across, it was just in maybe like the metaphysical or psychology, just browsing around, and I saw this title, DMT, the spirit molecule, an investigation and research on near-death experiences and other mystical experiences. And it was the title, Near-Death Experiences, that caught my attention. I didn't know anything about DMT. I didn't know anything about, psychedelic research at this point. And I picked up that book and I bought it. And as I started reading this book and I started to really kind of stumble across Terence McKenna, and, or maybe I stumbled across Terence McKenna first, I forget the timeline there, but, once I started hearing all these other people start talking about this experience, and it was especially when I heard Terence McKenna go, the self-transforming machine elves. And I just, when I heard that, I lost it and I said, holy shit, other people have seen these things too? And then, reading through Strassman's book and researching, him giving people like pretty much just like IV infusions and injecting them with DMT and talking about meeting insects, meeting all sorts of entities. And I'm just scratching my head going, what the hell's going on here? Like, this is the most fascinating thing, that you could, take a compound and have this cross-cultural experience of these, I don't know, archetypes, these entities, whatever they are. But the thing that like really freaked me out about it was how similar that psilocybin experience was to dying. And so when I came across Rick Strassman's book, I started to kind of hypothesize what was really going on, and thinking, okay, here's somebody that's doing research on dimethyltryptamine and kind of hypothesizing that's produced in the body, and it's produced in the pineal gland, which, we don't really know. There's some evidence that suggests that they found pineal or DMT in the pineal gland of rats and mice, but not so much in the human mind. Largest concentration sounds like it's in the lungs, which I find to be really interesting. But I had this hypothesis that this is the molecule that's released endogenously when you're born and when you die and during near-death experiences. And so I'm sitting there reading this book and going, okay, I had this near-death experience. Maybe I started to have this endogenous release of DMT. And then you're looking at psilocybin, and then looking at the chemical, the makeup of psilocybin, and you're looking at, wow, here's a DMT molecule that has an extra group of phosphates attached to it. And that's all psilocybin is. It makes kind of like an orally active dose of DMT. That extra group of phosphates allows it to pass through the liver and allows it to enter the blood-brain barrier. If you just had raw DMT and ingested it, you have monoamine oxidase inhibitors that stop that from getting into the blood-brain barrier. And so I started putting this together and going, wow, like, this is really interesting. Like, I could, this fungus that just grows, like, reminded me so much of dying. And there's such a weird similarity there that it freaked me out, that like I couldn't help but just like, I needed to study it. I needed to try to figure out what was going on there. So that led me to a lot of literature around Terence McKenna, Rick Strassman, and then later on I came across Stan Groff after another type of spiritual emergence that I had. And then that experience, led me to Burlington College.
So you were acquainted with Groff prior to Burlington College?
Yeah, I found myself in like a spiritual emergence after a really intense psychedelic experience, and I needed to try to figure that one out too. And so, I came across Stan's work, and as I was reading this book, I think he mentioned like transpersonal psychology, and I was just like, I need to study this stuff. Where can I just, study this?
And where are we in the timeline now? Are we over a year past the...
Yeah, so this was, when I came across Groff, I was 20 or 21. So psilocybin experience was around 19.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And Burlington College, did you find that on your own?
I did, yeah. The year before, I drove out to Naropa. Naropa was on my list, or I didn't drive out to Naropa. I drove out to Colorado Mountain College. My goal was to go to there for 2 years and then transfer to Naropa. And then, so there's only a few schools that offer transpersonal psychology, and Burlington College was pretty much the only one that had like a BA in it where I could really dive into it. Naropa, they have like that BA, and I don't know what it is, but it seemed like most of their programming was in the master level. So I was thinking, okay, I'll go do my undergrad, and then maybe, if I want to do that, I'll go do that at Naropa. But I drove to Burlington, and I already visited Burlington during high school. A friend was trying to check out UVM or Champlain, so I went up to Vermont with him. And when I went to Burlington, I just fell in love. It felt so familiar, and I mean, obviously, because I've been there before, but there was a more homey feeling than what I felt in Boulder. And when I visited Burlington College and was able to talk to the admissions and stuff like that, I was like, this is it. Like, this is where I need to be. So yeah, but it was only the few programs that offered a transpersonal psychology degree.
Mm-hmm. And was it very long before you met the Gibsons?
I started Burlington College January 2010, and I think I met them October of 2010. So it was during the second semester of Burlington College. I signed up for their Holotropic Breathwork workshop, not thinking too much about it. Just, I'm hearing everybody talk highly of it, and I'm very skeptical.
It was posted at school.
What was that?
It was posted at school.
It was a 1-credit weekend workshop.
Okay. And so for the audience, they probably don't know who the Gibsons are. Could you just give them a little? Gibsons are wonderful people, and Kyle knows them better than I do, so I'll let him.
Yeah, they've been offering holotropic breathwork workshops for over 25 years. I met them at Burlington College. They were adjunct professors there and teachers. And so they were offering a 1-credit weekend workshop in holotropic breathwork through the transpersonal psychology program. And that's how I met them. Lenny Gibson has a background in philosophy and psychology. Elizabeth, I forget what her academic background's in, writing, I think.
Yeah,
English maybe. She does a lot of editing. And yeah, so they've been really kind of doing this work. They studied with Stan for a while. Elizabeth was an editor for some of Stan's books, like The Ultimate Journey. And now we're kind of in the phase of creating, well, they have the nonprofit started and created, and now we're starting to pass on their work, and we're calling it Dream Shadow Transpersonal Breathwork, which has more of a philosophical component to it than maybe holotropic. Same technique, same form, but there's a little bit, I think, philosophy built into it.
So the audience might not know this, but Stan Groff is the titan of transpersonal psychology, and he started with doing a lot of work with psychedelics himself, and then took what he learned and, informed by shamanism and Mutkananda and a lot of things, and created this modality that produces non-ordinary states of consciousness without the use of drugs. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, he was probably over 5,000 LSD psychotherapy sessions. He was doing this in Prague, and then here in the States, down in Maryland. And then counterculture hit, all the research got on lockdown. He found himself over at Esalen, and he was a scholar in residence there, writing up all of his kind of clinical notes from all the research and clinical stuff that he was doing. And during his time there, he ended up, forming this technique with his wife, Christina, called holotropic breathwork. And yeah, people can have some really powerful experiences. I was pretty skeptical of it. I really didn't think much of it when I first signed up for it, thinking, yeah, this is going to be as powerful as a near-death experience or a psychedelic trip. I doubt it. And it blew me away.
Was it definitely in that ballpark for you?
Yeah, I rate that first experience on, you know, the top. I mean, because it was really me reliving everything in a different way. It helped me kind of somatically process a lot of the trauma that I've been through. Started off with a birth experience of being kind of strangled by the umbilical cord. I shot up from the mat, started choking, started grabbing my neck, couldn't breathe, kind of gasping for air. And, you know, I thought, all right, like they're talking about birth theory, birth trauma in the intro lectures. But, you know, after I told my mom that, she's like, wow, that's really weird because you almost died during your birth. You have the umbilical cord wrapped all around your neck and body. So, you know, when I was able to kind of like line that up and confirm that that happened, I said, there's something interesting here. And, you know, during that first breathwork session, I went back to like that near death experience, that psilocybin experience, pretty much like back in that death bardo all over again. So, I mean, it really, really kind of showed me that there's all these tools and vehicles, and, you know, substances can get you there, but there's also other ways of going inside. And so that's what was most exciting for me. It's like, wow, I can do this by just breathing, by tuning inward and doing the work.
And were you impressed with the structure of it? You know, I mean, we're taking safeguards, we're attending to people, we're creating a container, it's not shits and giggles, we're making sure that the integration process is started and people
Yeah.
have action afterwards. Did that catch your attention or get your imagination going?
I don't think for during that first time, like I thought like, what is this? This is weird. Why is somebody sitting next to me? Like kind of like all that uncomfortable stuff. But as I've worked with it over the years, I think what we create in those containers and workshops is so crucial. It's what makes the technique so special. You know, there's a lot of different techniques out there and a lot of different kind of breathwork modalities. But you know, I think the way that Dream Shadow and Holotropic really approach this is really the safety of the container. It's a non-directive approach, so we're really not trying to, you know, in some breathwork lineages, maybe the facilitator, the sitter's getting up there and helping you try to do certain things. I mean, this is a very hands-off approach. And the way that I approach it is like really allowing that person to develop their own agency over their own experience. And we're just creating that container to have people explore. You wear eye shades. I mean, you don't have to, but, you know, low lit room, low lighting, really loud music, and really the focus is on the internal experience. And, you know, you know, it's somewhat modeled after psychedelic psychotherapy, the way that that's set up.
That's
So
my opinion, yeah.
yeah.
So are there other high water marks at Burlington that you want to mention in your sort of evolution around this stuff?
Burlington was such a unique experience. Like I was saying before we got recording, I started going through like some old syllabi and notes, trying to dig up for a course that I'm working on, and it was such a unique experience. I mean, just how experiential it was. When I really think about it, it's like that whole program was like doing inner work. And I'm just so thankful that that school existed and the format existed like that. Just think, you know, I remember just going to tell friends, like, I got credit to do this breathing technique. I got credit to go do a dream retreat. I got credit for this. I got credit to study like shamanic practices. It's like, it was kind of like Hogwarts in a sense. Like, it was
Yeah.
pretty unique. But, you know, I think one of the highlights was my capstone project, and being able to integrate my breathwork experience and integrate some of these psychedelic experiences and creating a 3-credit class at the college. I had a really great advisor, shout out to Kim, that really, you know, supported me with offering that class. So I was able to co-teach it with Lenny and Elizabeth. And then being invited back, shout out to you for supporting the class that Lenny and I did, the history of psychedelics, and just that movement, I think, was also a huge highlight of what was trying to get created there towards the end of the time.
Would you say that the Burlington College experience provided the container for integration, completing that, in a sense? I mean, I suppose it's never fully done, but.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, it really helped me to process a lot of the stuff I was going through. I mean, just the range of modalities that were explored there, from having classes on like Chinese medicine and acupuncture. I mean, obviously we didn't get trained in acupuncture, but just Chinese medicine theory, to getting trained in Reiki, studying time with Michael Watson and his wife Jenny to study, shamanic techniques and energy healing. Spending time with the Gibsons to do breath work. I mean, it was such a unique experience. And thinking about the integration during that first breathwork experience I had in 2010, I got the message, you need to go back and teach a lot of this stuff. And I really didn't think anything of it. And after I got that course passed and we were teaching it, Elizabeth pointed it out and she said, do you realize, like, you're kind of integrating that first breathwork experience, you're doing it, you're out teaching this? And I thought about it and I was like, that's really interesting that just happened. So
yeah, it's definitely one of those places that's, I think, maybe for teachers too, but for students sometimes it looks so liminal while they're in it that you can't really do much double bookkeeping when you're in it. You have to be this kind of, 6 months later, I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah. You think back and you go, that was an experience.
So I got a lot of questions now. So maybe we should jump to, you graduate. I can remember, well, a couple of things I'd like to ask you. One is, from our earlier discussions, it doesn't seem like these experiences led you to go free-falling into all kinds of psychedelic experience. That you've always had a fairly measured, respectful relationship with that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, now that I have like a psychedelic platform and I always talk about psychedelics, it's definitely a question somebody asks, like, oh, you must do that a lot. And the answer is no. It's actually, and partly I think because of my experience at Burlington College and really stumbling across breathwork and realizing that all these tools are here, we just need to be able to work with it. Breathwork is a tool. And then just thinking about all these other healing modalities, being able to integrate it. And during my first breathwork experience, that really kind of came up. That was like, wow, I really used psychedelics early on to try to figure out this death experience. And it was such a cognitive type of way for processing and thinking like, oh, all the answers are out there. And I just need, if I do this enough, I'll figure it out. And it wasn't until I started doing breath work where it was like, holy shit, I'm not doing any processing in my body. All this stuff is living in my body. And like, it's all there and I have access to it and I don't need a substance to access it. So, breath work was something that actually, I guess, pulled me away from a lot of that stuff and got me a little bit more grounded. And, part of it also is kind of going in there a bunch. It starts getting really weird. And it starts getting really strange and really dark. And this is the stuff sometimes people don't talk about. But every time I would go in there, I would always get similar messages. It's like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Like, last time you came here, this is what we told you to do, and you haven't done any of it. And so the focus on integration has been a huge part where actually doing that type of work has made me appreciate being here and the mundane a lot more. Because for me, this is where the magic is. Like I always said, as far out as I've been in some of those states and like coming back and then like looking at my hand and being like, I have a body, like, what am I doing here? Like, this is so strange. that mystical experience for me, I think because of my near-death experience, feels like home. And so there's nothing too mysterious about those experiences sometimes. For me, it's like the cosmic womb. It's like where we're born from and where we go back to. For me, that's home. It's familiar. Like for me, whenever I'm in that state, I go, oh yes, this is what this experience. The weird part is being here in 3D reality, in a body on Earth. And I mean, I think this is where a lot of the magic happens. I mean, you get to manifest stuff, you get to create things, you get to have, you know, interactions, and you wake up every day, you have no idea what each day is going to bring. And to me, that is the most psychedelic thing that I could think of. And just, you know, going outside and watching nature, and just watching the small little beauty unfold. I mean, for me, that's psychedelic enough to just sit here and appreciate every little moment. And so, yeah, I feel like, you know, they're teachers, and, you know, you kind of, there's that old classic Alan Watts quote. It's like, you know, you get the message, hang up the phone. Um, doesn't doesn't mean you never pick up the phone to call the teacher again when you're really struggling and you need it, right? But I'm a huge proponent of, you know, lots of time off, lots of integration, and these are very, very powerful tools, very powerful medicines, and I think they should be, you know, really well respected, because if not, I mean, I found myself into some dark, scary places, and I think that doing it at a younger age and not respecting it has taught me much more respect. Being like, yeah, I don't want to get myself in that situation again.
It's a huge regret of mine, because I
doing
that thing of just hundreds of times. And so you must have known that you wanted to take what you've learned and work in some therapeutic capacity after Burlington.
Yeah.
And I can remember it was a hard decision to figure out where to go.
Yeah.
You go to Prescott. Can they really accommodate your interests very well, or yes and no?
It was yes and no. You know, I really picked that school because I was working at a residential home in Burlington that I really liked. And so I didn't want to pick up and leave everything. But ironically, as soon as I started that program, I ended up leaving. Funny how that works. But, you know, they had that focus on somatic psychology. So that's what drew me there, and the online component. You know, they were doing a lot of restructuring at the time to be K-CREPT accredited. So a lot of it started to change. And from what I was hearing from other students, it changed a lot.
Towards more
conventional approaches, which, you know, I guess if you're trying to standardize and try to be K-CREPT accredited, that's what you have to do. But, you know, there's definitely room here and there to kind of explore some of the other stuff. But
and when was Psychedelics Today born? Was it while you were there?
While I was there, yeah. So I started Prescott in 2016, January, and then our first episode of Psychedelics Today launched May of 2016.
Nice.
Yeah.
And your partner is Joe Moore, right?
Yep.
Who, I take it you must have met him through the Gibsons, or?
I did, yeah. They kept like asking me, like, do you know Joe? Do you know Joe? And no. So we ended up setting up a phone call, and ironically, those phone calls were all based around, do we do the masters at Burlington College? And so, you know, we were always talking about you and the master's program and figuring out, like, you know, what is the next step? And then somehow that ended up, I don't even know, we ended up just kind of chatting about like putting an archive of Lenny and Elizabeth's talks together, and then somehow that dovetailed into starting a podcast.
So you started with the podcast?
With the podcast, yep.
And between the two of you and your connections, you probably were able to start, in terms of that field, that the psychedelic world, you got big names probably out of the gate, right?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. Like we've been focusing a little bit more on some of the smaller voices throughout our time. Like we've had some big name folks on, but you know, sometimes you know, I've heard those stories over and over again. So we've been really interested in like some of the other people doing the work. But you know, I was friends with some of the folks at a organization called Symposia, and so we started off with some of those folks, and then the networking kind of just naturally kind of came out of that. And you know, the psychedelic community back, you know, a few years ago, still relatively small, and I guess still kind of is, but you know, people are really open to collaboration. So I was always surprised like how open people were to just want to do interviews and with their time. There's definitely those times of like, I'm afraid to reach out to this person, they don't know who I am, and you know, surprisingly, they're like, yeah, we'll do an interview with you. And I was like, shit, okay.
Yeah, I'm always delighted when that happens. Of
Yeah.
course, I get a lot that people don't even call me back or write me back. Um, is the focus been around psychedelic psychotherapy largely, or is that?
Our main goal was to incorporate Groff's work and breath work into the psychedelic conversation. We noticed like when we were going to conferences and stuff like that, like, you know, we'd hear maybe Groff here and there, or people kind of talking about breath work, but we were really surprised, like, you know, people weren't really talking about it. And, you know, since that's like our lineage and that's been really influential, that's been part of the work is like, how do we bring breath work and some of Groff's work like back into the conversation? And so that was been the main focus. And, you know, lately, like the podcast does focus on different cultural aspects of psychedelics. So sometimes we'll have artists on, you know, but a main thing that we've really been focusing on is like, how can we make a resource for students? How can we make a resource for therapists that are interested in this? And, you know, a lot of our education now is starting to get geared more towards clinicians and therapists.
And is it fair to say that Groff's training to be a holotropic breathwork practitioner is informing a lot of the thinking around training to be a psychedelic psychotherapist or facilitator?
It's a good question. You know, there's some people that have been trained in that and that definitely have influenced, you know, some of that. Like, you know, Michael and Manny Mythhofer, who have been some of the lead researchers and therapists for the MAPS MDMA psychotherapy for PTSD studies. You know, they were trained in breathwork, and they used to do breathworks workshops when they lived in Vermont with the Gibsons. And so, you know, they come from that theoretical foundation. Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, he was part of that first training cohort. And so, you know, they will sometimes use breath work as a non-substance way of understanding non-ordinary states in their training. So, you know, they might encourage you to go to a breath work workshop just so you could have your own experience. As more training and stuff pops up, you know, I definitely see breath work starting to become more part of the conversation and part of different training aspects. And, you know, Groff just released a new series called The Way of the Psychonaut. I'm just looking it up there on the bookshelf. And had a big release. And I think he's starting, like some of his work is really starting to kind of influence the field all over again.
Are those new writings?
No, it's like a compilation of everything
He's like
started.
pushing 90, isn't he?
He's, I think, 87, 88, 89, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
He's got some energy.
So, you know, I don't know how to ask it, but what are you? Okay, what are the things you're seeing in the psychedelic world that really excite you in the States?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see, you know, when MAPS and some of these other organizations are able to, you know, possibly get approval for these medicines. So MAPS might be a few years out for FDA approval for MDMA psychotherapy. They're, starting up their phase 3 trials. So if they clear that and get good results and able to present it to the FDA, and they like the results, we could see MDMA psychotherapy. The same with psilocybin. There's a few companies that are exploring that. Both psilocybin and MDMA got what's called breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA, so helping to streamline that process. Something else that's exciting, and there's all these little nuances to these conversations, but I get excited about some of the decrim movements. So like, you see what happened in Denver with decriminalizing psilocybin, in Oakland, California, they're decriminalizing all plant medicines, and there's a new initiative to try to legalize ceremony, so people are able to do ceremony with ayahuasca and plant medicines. There's another initiative, I think it's called Measure 109 in Oregon, used to be called IP 34. And that's to legalize psilocybin assisted therapy. And so, that wouldn't be going through kind of like the FDA protocol for synthetic psilocybin. I think the way that it's written, there would be regulation and people producing, but I think you'd be able to use, organic material. And so I believe that's at a state level. So, if I think that's on the ballot in November in Oregon. So, we could see this type of therapy become available in certain states if people continue with these different initiatives, which makes me really excited, because there's a lot of critique about the medical model movement, the medical model. How does that limit access to certain populations versus like, can we take a decrim movement? Could we kind of do maybe what Oregon's doing and be able to use organic material instead of having buy GMP synthetic psilocybin at however much a kilo or gram costs.
And what gives you pause? What are the areas of concern for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversation that Joe and I have been having on some of our episodes recently is big business coming in. And a lot of people kind of coming into the market that our last episode, we were just kind of chatting about like, who are some of these people that are coming in that have no lineage, no experience in this? Like maybe they were like huge time investors or big business coming from the cannabis world and thinking that this is the next cannabis gold rush.
Yeah.
Which, I think if you don't know anything about these substances, you might be in for a rude awakening at times. And then just thinking about like, scalability, there's some new ketamine places. That's interesting. So ketamine is a Schedule 3 in the States, and, you're able to use that for therapeutic use. And so you're seeing lots of different models with that. And, how's the integrity? There's different models from just IV infusion clinics where you go and get an infusion of ketamine and then there's no psychotherapy, to, there's people that are just like scaling these businesses to do online ketamine psychotherapy, which, I guess in the age of COVID, that's helpful to some extent. But, I think it depends how they're operating. Like there's a clinic that I like a lot of the people there and really trust, and they're doing it. And I think they're doing it with integrity. And then there's other companies that are just doing it because they really kind of maybe just want to get it out there and be innovative and creative. But I worry about the, I'm really interested in the shadow side of things and really kind of being honest about how these substances are very powerful and how, if not used properly, they can spiral people into spiritual emergence. People can have really difficult experiences and, maybe their mental health gets a little bit worse. They can be really disruptive. And, are some of these people getting involved, they're just seeing money signs and not really thinking so much about like the tradition. Then you get into, cultural appropriation and, how are the people where these medicines come from getting exploited? how are we extracting information from many indigenous communities, and maybe taking their medicines away at times and thinking that we own it, and we can make different products off of it. So there's also a lot of kind of dark side stuff to the psychedelic renaissance as well, that we've been trying to keep track of and just have a conversation about. There are those benefits of being able to scale, get things mainstream. We're starting to maybe loosen some of the taboo around it, and the stigma, so maybe they get a little bit more accepted. And being able to run clinical trials and have a lot of that big money backing it, these are really expensive research projects. And so to have wealthy investors invest in that research, it's great because it helps then to legitimize things. But then you're also thinking, like, I don't know, Peter Thiel of PayPal is investing in some of these companies, and what's his role in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're always back to the same question that plagues training counselors and doctors and clergy. There's no way to vouch for the spiritual integrity of the providers.
Yeah.
They can really, that's where everything can go nuts. So, from where I sit, so resistance recovery is sort of a home for people that want to ask hard questions and talk about topics that may be taboo in recovery circles. And of course, psychedelics are one of them.
Yeah.
And the things that I see that trouble me, I sometimes feel like I'm looking at the 1960s Redux in this sort of naive enthusiasm that this is going to be the thing that transforms the world.
Yep.
Now, I am hopeful that because of folks like you and because of hard experience from the 60s, we've learned some lessons. I also see this thing too, though, that I see this actually from some fairly prominent people in your movement, where there's a sort of privileging of the psychedelic experience above other kinds of spiritual experiences. And, it always makes me want to say, well, there are a lot of times on acid where I had that shit figured out. Right? I had it figured out. And then 3 hours later, I couldn't quite recall what I had figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I know other people that do much more, mundane spiritual practices, contemplative practices, whatever, and they actually seem to becoming nicer, kinder people. So that's another thing that kind of gets me, is there's a little glam factor. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of people on resistance recovery who say that it got to move over a wall that no other modality around addiction could. So I'm just hoping that is some subset of your world. I mean, I know that's happening somewhat with the Iboga people and all that, but they really take it in a mature, disciplined way before it gets too big.
Yeah. This is stuff we definitely see, right? It's like my drugs are better than your drugs, and just thinking about recovery in general. I mean, this is something that we talk about, like, what is it, like psychedelic exceptionalism or like drug chauvinism. It's like, oh, like, we vibe much higher than everybody else, or like this is the ultimate experience. And there's a lot of spiritual bypassing that happens within these communities, and what type of danger does that bring? And yeah, it's definitely interesting to see. It's such a young field, and I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains and a lot of different characters and things that start to unfold. as new people start to come into here. And, you know, there's definitely going to be a huge push, right? I mean, like Gwyneth Paltrow has a whole episode on mushroom retreats in Jamaica on Goop Lab and just showing all the highlights.
Double whammy, mushroom retreat in Jamaica, man. Wow.
Yeah. You know, and it's like these are some of the things that we're going to have to battle, and there's going to be casualties to it, right? Because when people watch this, they think like, oh, this is going to be the answer. I read this article that this was a one-time fix. And so, you know, then you might have to deal with disappointment and deal with like some of this other stuff. So, I mean, you know, we're trying to have a lot of these tough conversations too. And like sometimes when Joe and I are chatting about some of this stuff, sometimes I feel really like I contradict myself at times. And, you know, because there's so much like little nuance here. And it's like, yes, I'm pro psychedelic, I'm pro cognitive liberty. I think these substances have the potential to really shift a lot of things. But we also have to sit here and be honest with ourselves and be like, this always hasn't fixed everything. You know, like there's these dark sides to it, that sometimes these medicines aren't for everybody. Sometimes people spin out of control with it. So we need to be having these tough conversations, even if it feels like we're attacking ourselves at times. Sometimes it feels like that, right? Like, oh,
that's reflexivity. That's meta. That's where it has to go. It's where the leadership has to be.
Yeah.
I applaud the hell out of that.
Like, I'm always questioning my intentions too, you know. I'm like, what am I doing here, like with this business, and you know, what's our trajectory? And you know, there's been a lot of cool shining opportunities that have presented, and sometimes I had to pull back and say, I don't want anything to do with that, because that's not where my integrity is at, or you know, I don't feel like that would be helpful for the field, or that doesn't align with me. And you know, I definitely see other people that they take that and they go, oh, this is the opportunity for me. And you know, then what type of consequences I have down the line, I don't know.
Yeah, I've known so many people that I think have had genuine spiritual awakenings. I'm not, you know, I'm talking about other modalities. I don't doubt the veracity of them, but when they commodify them, that's where they can't handle it. And they lose what they had, and pretty soon they're kind of the opposite place of where they started.
Yeah.
So one thing that really troubles me too is, and this troubles me both with the psychedelic world and with Groff, is that they are so conspicuously ignored by the Jungian world.
Yeah.
You know, and it feels like if anything would validate your theory, it would be either the psychedelic experience, but even more so Groff, because you can just take all this biological speculation, well, most of it out of there. And, you know, just the book Holotropic Breathwork, if you read that with Jungian eyes, it is validating the theory of archetypes like nobody's business. And yet it's like the theoretical school that was meant to be in dialogue is like snobbing you out or something.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just put together a course called Imagination is Revelation with a woman, Johanna Hilla. She's got her master's in religious studies and really focused on Jungian psychology in the Red Book. And, you know, that was a question I asked, and I forget what her response was 100%, but was, yeah, why are a lot of Jungians kind of turned off by psychedelics and, you know, these types of experiences? And, you know, maybe it's because Jung himself thought that they weren't always beneficial, and thought too much, too quick could actually kind of have a negative effect on the ego. And so maybe that's still, you know, coming from a Jungian lens, maybe that's still valid. But yeah, I think what you're pointing to is, I think there's a lot of depth-oriented work in Groff's work, and you know, those two worlds complement each other a lot. I mean, if you look at, like, you know, Groff's basic perinatal birth matrices, I mean, that is so archetypal. and it has so much image, so much rich archetypal energy. I mean, those two line up perfectly together. So I don't know, maybe it's because of the stigma around psychedelics and just thinking like, here's somebody that's using a substance to maybe bypass other ways. And I mean, isn't that a critique with most substance related things of like, you know, here, this is the easy way. You're taking a substance and it's going to wear off eventually. So then you have to come back and do the harder work.
Yeah, it's the cup would carry water before and after argument, but boy, it really doesn't apply with Groff as much. Not the breathwork anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough work. And I know a lot of people in the psychedelic community that hate breathwork because it's hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's too much work.
Yeah. So just before we close up, could you give me a sense of, for the audience and me, a sense of the dimensions and breadth of your work now? So, I mean, like, how many followers do you have, and how much training do you offer, and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So we offer trainings. We've been on an 8-week cycle. We offer 2 groups, a course called Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. You can find out all of our course material at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. So we run that live, and we also have been working on some other courses that you can take at your own pace. We have a shadow side of psychedelics. And so that's a bunch of interviews with people in the field talking about the shadow side. So stuff that we were talking about, capitalism, to actually work in with like the Jungian aspects of shadow and psychedelic experiences. And then our Imagination as Revelation course that digs into Jungian psychology and seeing how psychedelics and Jungian psychology are like a perfect mix to talk about archetypal energy.
Is that a new course? Has that been offered yet?
It's a new course, yeah. It's out now. You can purchase it, and we're still releasing the course content there. And I think we have some interviews getting lined up for it as well. So I'm excited about it. It was really fun putting together and really awesome. Yeah, you can follow us on the podcast. You can check us out anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Psychedelics Today. We're on all the social media. And yeah, our following seems pretty substantial. We hit over 1 million downloads with our podcast.
Congratulations.
Thanks, which is a huge milestone for us.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think
you
about.
You hit a million, and that's in 5 years, 4 years?
4 years, yeah. I think we hit 1 million like after our 4-year anniversary.
And you're probably getting a lot of interest abroad too. Is that right?
Tons of interest, and that's what really like. It's really cool running the course because the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, we run that live, and so I mean we had people in Australia, Sweden, some people called in from New Zealand, Switzerland, Germany, Slovakia. I mean, all over the world. I mean, that's really cool. Brazil, Costa Rica, Mexico. So it's been fun being able to just teach this stuff and talk about like the little nuanced approaches to all of this with people from all over the world.
Well, this has been just fantastic. Your story never gets, that's a whale of a story. And it's so funny, it's sort of serendipitous because sitting here talking to you, I had scheduled another guy who had a very profound near-death experience. I'd scheduled him a while ago. And then it was only when we started sitting down, I'm like, oh my God, I had another one already. And then I've got a third guy. So I'm going to have a series unintentionally.
Near-death experience track.
Yeah, so
I love it.
Listeners will be able to compare. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks so much, Piers. It's always great to catch up with you
let's
and chat.
and
I really appreciate your time here.
All right.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Take care.